Within the past 48 hours, the Russian government has provided Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna a dossier on their intelligence of JFK's assassination. We are going to translate it for you and break down the key findings. Buckle up.
Imagine this. It is November 22nd, 1963. The unthinkable happens in Dallas. But the real high-stakes drama, it isn't unfolding in Washington, D.C.
Right.
It's happening, like, 5,000 miles away, deep inside the Kremlin, Moscow. The clock stops there, too, and maybe, just maybe, for the whole world.
And, for decades, we've only had these, hazy ideas about how the Soviets really reacted internally.
Yeah.
Public statements, diplomatic niceties.
Right, the official line.
Exactly. But that era, it just ended. In a really stunning, almost unbelievable political moment, the Russian government has just handed over this detailed dossier.
Yeah, I heard about this. It's internal communications, KGB reports, frantic diplomatic cables, all from that week.
We are literally looking at the Soviet Union's secret file on the JFK assassination. It's incredible.
So this is breaking history, truly unprecedented. We finally get the Kremlin's real-time, unfiltered take on the event that pushed the Cold War right to the edge. And this deep dive, that's our mission today. We're going through this Russian dossier, this document dump delivered by the Russian ambassador, no less, to understand Moscow's immediate, frankly terrifying verdict.
And let's just cut to the chase, the immediate punchline.
Okay.
They were convinced it was a frame-up, right from the start, orchestrated by American hardliners, designed specifically to trigger a new global conflict.
Wow. Okay. Frame up.
Yeah. To really grasp the level of panic this caused, you really have to rewind just a little bit. Think about the context.
The Cold War backdrop.
Exactly. We were barely 12 months out from the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was the single moment humanity came closest to full-scale nuclear annihilation.
And the only reason we didn't go over the edge was because Kennedy and Khrushchev somehow managed to pull back.
Right. And these Soviet documents, the internal analysis, they reveal something fascinating. Despite all the public antagonism, they were quietly building what they actually called a non-visible bridge of mutual understanding.
A non-visible bridge between Moscow and Washington.
Yes. Built on this shared, terrifying realization that nuclear war meant mutual suicide. It had to be avoided. So their focus was actually shifting, away from pure confrontation towards arms control.
Like the test ban treaty in '63.
Precisely. That treaty symbolized this shift. So the fear in Moscow, the absolute second that news from Dallas hit, it wasn't just political calculation, it was existential dread.
They saw Détente crumbling.
Instantly.
Yeah.
They knew this murder could just derail that fragile easing of tensions détente and immediately empower the most extreme anti-Soviet voices in the U.S., the ones they always called the reactionary circles.
So their whole strategy for, basically survival, for nuclear peace, was suddenly hanging by a thread.
It was in the crosshairs, absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack that immediate scene. Inside the Kremlin, why was Kennedy's death such a disaster for them? He was the leader of their biggest enemy, right?
Well, because the Soviet documents are just crystal clear on this. They saw Kennedy as the single most preferable U.S. leader they could possibly deal with.
Really? More than others?
Yes. They saw him as pragmatic, someone who'd learned the hard lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis, someone who genuinely understood the irreversible dangers of nuclear war. They actually appreciated his commitment, his willingness to find common ground on these massive security risks.
And they'd seen proof of that recently, hadn't they? Gromyko, their foreign minister, his meetings before November, they were pretty cooperative.
Surprisingly so. Gromyko's agenda was packed with talks about moving beyond the test ban treaty. They were exploring non-aggression pacts, things like that.
Wow.
The internal assessment of Kennedy's policy, they described it as having positive, realistic moments. So when those shots rang out in Dallas, Moscow didn't just lose an adversary. They felt they lost a partner. A precarious, maybe, but crucial partner in, global survival.
Okay, let's picture the moment the news actually breaks. Dobrynin, he's the Soviet ambassador in D.C. He gets the flash news late in the evening, Moscow time. Contacts Khrushchev immediately. Khrushchev's resting outside Moscow, right?
He'd just returned from a trip to Kyiv.
Right.
And his first instinct...
What was it?
Panic. Pure panic. Followed immediately by this frantic PR move. Khrushchev instantly assumed, that the assassination would be blamed on communism.
Makes sense, given the climate.
Totally. So his prepared public statement, the very next day, it was this desperate attempt to create distance, to separate Soviet ideology from political violence.
And he used Lenin himself to make the point. That's pulling out the big guns Soviet style.
The biggest. He explicitly quoted Lenin saying communists opposed terror methods, opposed the physical elimination of competitors, but this wasn't some philosophical discussion. It was high-stakes damage control, trying to distance the USSR from Oswald before the global media machine spun it the other way.
Because deep down internally, their gut feeling, and this seems to be the core of this whole dossier, was that Oswald was just a tool.
A manipulated tool, yes. A patsy. They were terrified the assassination was designed to become a major problem, blamed on international communism.
Which would then be used by who?
By those hardline anti-Soviet elements in the U.S. to push for aggressive action. Maybe even war. That was the nightmare scenario.
Okay, so let's get to the big question. The one this dossier really addresses. Did Oswald work for the Soviets? Dobrynin meets immediately with the KGB guy in Washington.
The KGB resident, yeah.
Right. And for listeners, the KGB is the main intelligence agency. GRU is military intelligence. What did they conclude? Both of them.
Unequivocal denial. Immediate, unanimous, definitive. Both the KGB and the GRU confirmed. We have no ties whatsoever with Lee Harvey Oswald. Zero connection.
How did they explain his contact then? He did write to them.
They explained that all his correspondence was through ordinary mail. Regular post, which they correctly assumed the U.S. authorities were already monitoring anyway.
So not a secret channel?
Not at all. They saw him not as an asset, not as a spy, but as a liability, a total misfit.
Okay, let's dig into that misfit idea. His time in Minsk, 59 to 62. He defected to the USSR. What did these documents say about how they actually treated him there?
Well, they basically saw him as a kind of public nuisance they had to manage carefully. He shows up demanding citizenship.
And they said no.
They rejected his request for Soviet citizenship, flat out. Instead, they sort of parked him in Minsk, gave him a special apartment, okay, not super fancy, but better than average, and this tiny Red Cross allowance, 70 rubles a month.
Which wasn't much, even then.
Barely enough to live on. Certainly not the salary of some high-value sleeper agent. And he was under constant watch.
Surveillance.
Yeah, but more because he was annoying and unpredictable, not because he was operationally important. They couldn't wait to get rid of him, honestly. His whole presence was just awkward for their PR.
Right. Now here's where the Kremlin's own conspiracy theory starts to get, well, some traction internally. Just 2 weeks before Dallas, Oswald sends a letter to the Soviet embassy, and it sets off alarm bells inside the embassy.
This is a really crucial piece of the puzzle. Diplomatic cables immediately flagged this specific letter, dated November 9th, 1963. The internal analysts in Moscow, they noted its clearly provocative character.
Provocative how?
They suspected it was a deliberate frame job, because the letter seemed almost designed to create a public impression of some secret connection between Oswald and the USSR, for, as they put it, some of their own purposes, meaning the purposes of American plotters.
And what made this letter stand out so much from his earlier letters?
The physical format. Yeah. All his previous letters, handwritten, like some lone nut writing it.
Okay.
This letter, the November 9th one, machine typed.
Ah.
For the KGB, that difference screamed external involvement. It looked like planted evidence, like someone had typed it up specifically to be found later, pointing the finger straight at Moscow.
So the typed letter is maybe evidence of a frame-up? Then Jack Ruby shoots Oswald on live TV.
Right.
For Moscow, that just seals the deal, doesn't it? This confirms the whole thing.
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
The second Ruby shot Oswald, the presidium of the Central Committee, that's the top Soviet leadership. They analyzed it immediately. And the conclusion from the KGB and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it was swift and chilling.
What did they say?
They said Ruby's action more clearly showed that the entire story with Oswald is a dark business, masked by reactionary circles in the USA and Texas police.
So not just some random act by a nightclub owner, they saw it as a deliberate silencing.
A cover-up artist, basically. Preventing the patsy from talking, preventing the cover story from collapsing.
Wow.
For Moscow, this was it. Definitive proof of a high-level American conspiracy. Silencing Oswald to stop him revealing the real forces behind the assassination, the speed, the sheer brazenness of Ruby's act. It confirmed all their worst fears, that there were powerful forces inside the U.S. actively trying to blow up Détente and restart the Cold War.
Okay, so the assassination happens. The guy they think is the patsy, Oswald, is silenced. And then bang, the propaganda trap slams shut.
Instantly. American media goes into overdrive. Oswald's a Marxist, a far leftist, pro-Castro. It was the absolute moment of peak danger for Moscow.
This is exactly what they fear.
Exactly. The U.S. press and the Dallas police in particular, they were relentless, constantly hammering on Oswald's time in the Soviet Union, his Russian wife, Marina.
She was interrogated heavily too, right?
Continuous police questioning, the documents say. It all built the exact narrative the Kremlin dreaded. This was a foreign plot, a communist conspiracy, designed falsely to justify, well, who knows what action against them or Cuba.
So you're Moscow. How do you fight back against that? You can't just issue a denial. Nobody would buy it.
Right. So the Kremlin makes this incredibly risky, but also kind of brilliant move. They opt for weaponized transparency.
Weaponized transparency. What does that even mean?
It was fascinating and definitely self-serving. But instead of just denying, they decided to release information, controlled release, mind you, directly to the U.S. State Department and the Warren Commission, which had just been formed.
Wait. They gave the U.S. government internal Soviet files on Oswald?
Photocopies, yes, of his entire dossier.
Like what? What was in it?
His medical records from Minsk. His visa application. Crucially, the internal memos confirming they denied his request for Soviet citizenship.
Why? What was the strategy there?
It was calculated. They wanted to prove Oswald wasn't some prized Soviet agent. He was the opposite. A deeply unhappy, psychologically unstable guy they couldn't wait to get rid of. A burden.
So the goal wasn't just, we didn't do it. It was, he was your problem, not ours.
Precisely. They were basically saying, look, he was yours. We didn't even want him. The ultimate aim was to shift the focus back onto American internal politics, to argue that these ultra-right circles were the real culprits, and that any attempt to link the USSR or Cuba was just, quote, malicious anti-Soviet and anti-Cuban insinuation. It was a bold gamble to try and control the story by shaping the evidence.
But hold on, if the KGB was watching him in Minsk, wouldn't releasing any files risk confirming U.S. suspicions? Like, aha, you were interested in him.
That was the calculated risk, exactly. The key was what they chose to release and what they presumably held back.
Ah, selective transparency.
Very selective. They focused purely on the documents that showed him as a political liability, his complaints, their rejection of him. They didn't release, say, detailed surveillance logs of his daily routine, but they released enough paperwork to prove he was a headache for them.
So the political need to prevent World War III basically outweighed the counterintelligence risk.
That seems to be the calculation they made. It was high-stakes poker.
Okay, let's talk more about this misfit in Minsk picture they painted. We know the 70 rubles a month. What else made him a liability, not an agent, in their eyes?
Well, the internal memos show that from the moment he said he wanted to stay, he was just a constant headache. Logistically, diplomatically, he was always complaining.
What did he do there?
They gave him a standard job in a radio factory. Nothing sensitive, no access to military secrets or intelligence stuff. Even his marriage to Marina Prusakova, a Soviet citizen, was viewed with some suspicion by the authorities.
He wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms.
No. He wasn't allowed to just wander around freely. He was managed. A project, not a comrade. They basically had to handle him until he finally decided to leave, which he did in '62, taking Marina with him back to the U.S.
Okay, so you've just heard how the Kremlin instantly, rejected the lone gunman theory. They were actively putting together his dossier, releasing parts of it to avoid being framed, trying desperately to stop a global crisis. But the tightrope walk wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. We really need to understand what this means for us now. And we are about to reveal the crucial secret deal LBJ cut with Khrushchev literally right after the murder, and the ultimate conspiracy theory Moscow held, which they felt was confirmed by Jackie Kennedy herself. You're going to want to stick with us for the final part of this deep dive.
You really are.
And hey, if you're finding these historical nuggets as completely mind-blowing as we are, you know what to do. Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe. Seriously, it helps us keep digging. And if you want even more exclusive materials, behind-the-scenes stuff, community chats, join our memberships. The link's below. Okay, let's get back to it.
All right, so let's look at this crucial caveat. While the whole world is mourning and reeling in shock, there's this secret diplomacy happening behind the scenes. Khrushchev and LBJ, they exchange confidential notes almost immediately, bypassing all the public noise.
This is that non-visible bridge in action, maybe. The thing that stopped it all from escalating into, another Cuba crisis.
It absolutely was. What did LBJ say to Khrushchev in that first critical message?
Yeah, what did he say?
It was a massive reassurance. He told Khrushchev, point blank, he was fully in agreement with JFK's policy and that he was absolutely committed to continuing down that path of easing tensions.
Wow. So right away he's saying, we're not pivoting. This tragedy won't be an excuse for aggression.
Exactly. That was vital for Moscow to hear. And Khrushchev,
What was his response?
He reciprocated immediately. He emphasized that Kennedy had built that crucial, non-visible bridge of mutual understanding. And he assured LBJ the Soviet government was ready, sincerely ready, to make new efforts for peace with the new administration.
So the secret exchange right after the murder, it kind of cemented their commitment to keep Détente alive.
It did. It was like a quiet agreement between them. No matter who actually killed Kennedy, they weren't going to let the hardliners on either side win by starting another global conflict over it.
Okay, so that tightrope walk towards peace leads straight to the biggest flashpoint, Cuba. Oswald was being painted as pro-Castro. How did Johnson handle that specific angle, especially with the Soviets?
The stakes there were just astronomical. Remember, the Cuban Missile Crisis was still fresh. So Moscow sends Anastas Mikoyan, a very senior, trusted diplomat, to D.C. for the funeral.
Right.
And in a really pivotal meeting with Mikoyan, President Johnson gives this critical, definitive assurance about Cuba.
What was it? What did he promise?
Johnson stated, completely unambiguously, "We have no plans to invade Cuba, and we have no basis for invading other countries."
Wow. That's huge.
It was a massive diplomatic win for Moscow, and obviously for Havana, too. It basically neutralized, at least temporarily, the Soviets' biggest fear that U.S. hardliners would use JFK's death as a pretext to finally invade Cuba.
But the Soviets, they were still worried about those certain forces inside the U.S., weren't they? They even changed their own plans to avoid poking the bear.
They absolutely were. The internal Soviet analysis kept noting this persistent high risk, that these reactionary forces in the USA will look for a pretext to push President Johnson into hostile actions against Cuba.
So what did they do?
They acted proactively. They decided to postpone Khrushchev's own planned state visit to Cuba, which was highly anticipated.
Why?
Purely strategic. They reasoned the visit would be unhelpful right then. It could be seen as a challenge by the U.S. hardliners, potentially igniting passions and giving those forces the political ammo they needed to pressure LBJ and derail his more cautious approach.
Smart, if cynical, diplomacy. Okay, let's jump ahead about a year. The Warren Commission. Set up by LBJ, it releases its big report. Conclusion: Oswald acted alone. What did the Kremlin make of that official finding?
Total skepticism, unwavering. The Soviet internal memos, even long after the report came out, they just continued to express deep doubt. They kept calling the whole Oswald thing a dark business masked by reactionary circles.
Even though the Warren Commission presented evidence, ballistics, the timeline, the rifle.
Right. The commission called them unshakable reasons to believe Oswald did it alone. But Moscow just dismissed it.
Why? Did they think the evidence was faked? Or just incomplete?
They seem to view the commission itself as more of a political exercise, something designed to restore public order and confidence, maybe cover up intelligence failures,
right,
rather than uncover the absolute, potentially messy truth.
So they're pointing to conflicting accounts.
Yeah, they highlighted things like alleged contradictory evidence reports of a second rifle, questions about the timeline stuff the commission had officially examined but found to have no weight. For the Kremlin, the Warren report wasn't the final word on the facts. It was a political solution to close a dangerous wound and avoid deeper questions about who really held power in the U.S.
Okay, setting aside the assassination conspiracy itself, Moscow was also watching LBJ very closely on the domestic front, right? Would he actually follow through on Kennedy's agenda?
Oh, absolutely. Soviet analysts were tracking his political moves very carefully. They generally believed he would continue Kennedy's legacy, especially on things like civil rights and economic reforms.
And did their analysis bear that out?
Yeah, their analysis noted Johnson's immediate and pretty aggressive push to get JFK's stalled legislation passed. Things like the Civil Rights Act, the tax cuts, stuff that had been blocked by that conservative coalition of Republicans and Southern Democrats.
So the Soviets saw this as Johnson consolidating power.
They saw it as him cleverly using Kennedy's martyrdom, essentially, to push through that agenda and solidify his own position, building a strategy to win the '64 election by seeming to carry JFK's torch.
Which brings us to maybe the most poignant and, for the Soviets, perhaps the most validating moment in this whole dossier, Jacqueline Kennedy. Her private words to Mikoyan at the White House reception after the funeral.
Yes. Mikoyan, playing the careful diplomat, approached her late in the evening, and the cable back to Moscow describing this encounter. It's really moving. It says he was deeply affected by her. She spoke with great feeling, barely holding back tears.
And what did she say? What did Jackie Kennedy tell the Soviet envoy?
Her words were stunning. She said she was certain.
Yeah.
Certain that Chairman Khrushchev and her husband could have succeeded in achieving success.
Wow. Could have succeeded. That's profound. She's not just offering condolences. She's saying their joint project the peace effort, the détente, it was working.
And the implication is clear.
That its success is why he was killed.
Exactly. For Moscow, this was like validation from the highest, most personal source imaginable. It confirmed their deepest internal theory, that the forces opposed to U.S.-Soviet cooperation, the internal American enemies of peace, were the ones who struck her husband down. It cemented their view that the ultimate conspiracy wasn't about Oswald. It was geopolitical, about stopping peace.
So let's try to pull all this together. This incredible pile of documents, the panic, the KGB denial, the risky transparency, the secret LBJ Khrushchev deal, Jackie Kennedy's heartbreaking conviction. What's the final, ultimate Soviet verdict on the JFK assassination?
Looking at the whole picture painted by these documents, JFK's death was seen unequivocally as a serious blow to all efforts toward peace and normalizing U.S.-Soviet relations. Moscow saw the assassination purely as an act driven by powerful internal American forces who were dead set against any kind of long-term cooperation between the superpowers.
And the lasting implication for them.
It hammered home this paradoxical idea. Despite their massive ideological differences, the assassination proved they shared this incredibly heavy responsibility to prevent nuclear war. It underscored the obvious necessity, as they put it, of finding ways to cooperate to prevent global apocalypse. The conspirators, in Moscow's unshakable view, weren't communists or Cubans. They were powerful insiders within the American system, trying desperately to turn back the clock to confrontation.
Okay, so this deep dive into the Kremlin secret files, it's really laid out three key things, hasn't it? First, the Soviets reacted with sheer panic, terrified they'd be framed and it would spark World War III.
Absolutely. Second, Moscow used its own intelligence, the KGB, the GRU, to confirm internally that Oswald was never their guy. He was a liability, a misfit in Minsk. And they cleverly used that internal truth as a weapon against the propaganda they feared.
Right. And third, their conviction never wavered. JFK was killed by hardline reactionary forces inside the U.S. to stop the move towards peace he was making with Khrushchev, a belief tragically echoed, in their minds, by Jackie Kennedy herself.
The big picture takeaway here is just staggering, really. The Kremlin, America's biggest adversary, instantly saw Kennedy not just as an enemy leader assassinated, but as a kind of martyr, felled by enemies within his own system, enemies of peace. And they acted strategically to make sure his death wasn't used as an excuse, a casus belli, for a catastrophic escalation.
It's fascinating, the Soviet reaction coming from this deep-seated fear of what they saw as the ruthless, cruel system of American politics behind the assassination. It highlights this terrifying possibility, doesn't it? That even at the absolute height of the Cold War, maybe the biggest threat wasn't just the open clash of ideologies, maybe it was the shadow forces within both nations, dedicated to keeping the conflict going forever.
This unprecedented release definitely confirms that was Moscow's long-held suspicion about JFK. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If they felt forced to defend themselves against the lone gunman narrative back then, what other secrets, what other perspectives on major world events might still be locked away in archives? Secrets that could change how we understand conflicts we thought we knew.
It definitely makes you think, what truths are still behind the curtain? Go explore.